News and Talk, WAOK Black History Series.
Blackness, keep on.
On this episode, Derrick sits down with the sons of the movement, Kwanza Hall, son of civil rights activist Leon Hall, Michael Julian Bond, son of Julian Bond, and Kwame Abernathy, son of Dr. Ralph David Abernathy. Their fathers were central players in the most important movement for Black progress. Find out how their sons viewed them. The eye-opening interview will make you laugh, think, and wonder. Listen as these sons talk about their fathers' hopes, dreams, and unfinished work of the civil rights movement. And now, conversations with Derrick Boazman, featuring history makers, the sons of the movement, on News and Talk 1380 WAOK.
Today we talk to the sons of the movement, as this is part of WAOK Black History Series, where we're talking to those who shape history, those who made history, and those who have been an eyewitness to history. And today we're very fortunate to have three great friends, but whose lives are such an integral part of the civil rights movement, and so much of that time was spent here in Atlanta. We have with us today Kwanza Hall, the son of Leon Hall. Kwanza, welcome to this Black History Series.
Great to be here. Thank you for having us. Thank you to V103, WAOK, as well as my good friends and brothers that are here today.
Michael Julian Bond, no stranger. We've been knowing each other since we were about 14, 15 years old. We go a long ways back, man. You carry the name of a legendary civil rights leader, Julian Bond, and that's your father. Welcome to this conversation.
Oh, well, thank you, Derrick. And I also want to echo what Kwanza said about thanking WAOK and V103 for helping to make this possible, to have this conversation. And so very, very pleased to be here with you.
Kwame Abernathy. The name itself speaks to buildings, it speaks to streets, it speaks to a man who was a phenomenal preacher, a prayer's prayer. Your father was a serious preacher, West Honor Street Baptist Church, but started in Montgomery, and you've carried on that legacy. So welcome to this conversation as well.
Brother Boazman, it is truly a pleasure and an honor to be here on the stage with these gentlemen and to speak for the next generation. I want to thank you for your work, of course, and also, most importantly, thank the mother station, V103 and WAOK.
Let's talk about it. Look, this series, when they asked me to do it, I said I'll only do it if I can talk to folks who are going to be honest and candid and open, because we want to learn things about you, your father's relationship, your family that people don't really know, right? Let's start with you, Kwanza Hall. We've seen you. You've been to Congress. You've been to the city council, been to the school board. But people didn't know about your pedigree as a movement son. Your father, Leon Hall, was a young organizer, quit school, really, to join the movement at 17. He said, there's something happening in this country, and I want to be a part of it. Talking to folks like John Bascom, J.T. Johnson, those folks who were around and saw the young Leon Hall. Tell us about your father. How did he come to get involved with the movement, and what did you see in him, or what part of him you knew that he had to be a part of what was happening in the 60s?
Right. Well, thank you. First, he was born and raised in Montgomery, 1947. He was the youngest member of Dr. King's staff. And when I think of him and I think of the stories that have been told, I think of courage. You know, he risked his life on many occasions, as many of them did. But when you don't have the cameras and it's dark in Mississippi or it's dark in Alabama, you go into these small towns to rile people up and get them excited before the cameras arrive, before you kind of like prepping the crowd. They might kill you and you might not make it back. So the stories of him hiding in morgues because the police were chasing them, Governor Wallace put out edicts to say, if you find him, kill him on the spot. And after that happened, he probably started when he was 15, and he was basically pushed out of school. He was a straight A student, and at 17 he said, I've got to keep keeping on and fighting in the movement. And Dr. King and Andrew Young and Ralph David Abernathy brought him to Atlanta. they said we got to get him out of Montgomery because if he stays in Alabama, he won't stay alive. And he ended up moving to the old Fourth Ward and lived in Freedom House. So his story is a story of courage, a story of love, a story of a young person who basically dedicated their life to an ideal that really our country still hasn't lived up to.
Yeah. You mentioned 3 or 4 things in that we got to unpack. Your dad obviously tells you the story of having to run into a morgue, lay down with the dead bodies as a survival coping mechanism to stay alive. What did he tell you about that? What did he say he had done, or the tenor of the moment that made people willing to kill a young man?
I think he was, the police had shot, or the Klan or whoever, this crowd of citizens council type people had shot at the car. And they figured out a way to kind of hide. And, our friends in the community were either pastors or they had the mortuary or both, or a lady at the church, at the school. So this was one of those groups that said, hey, we can hide him here for a minute, but you got to get him out of here. And that was, countless stories. I remember we would go around town. This is after Dr. King had passed away, of course. I wasn't born until 71. But we go on fishing trips in South Georgia. Police would pull us over. My brother and I would look at each other like, uh-oh, here we go again. And my dad would be standing up. I have countless pictures of him standing eye to eye with police officers. So that idea of police brutality was something that we grew up with, and we were always afraid he wasn't going to make it back to the car.
Wow.
Yeah.
He was known as a master organizer and brave and fierce, as you said, and was leading the southern end of the Poor People's Campaign, which was Dr. King's last kind of protest effort. We're going to bring all of these poor people to Washington, D.C. to put the plight of poor people before the federal government. What did he tell you about working in that movement at that time, the last leg of organizing what was supposed to be even more profound, shock the conscience of America by talking about poor people in their plight?
Right. So, as a child, I really didn't know that, there was a difference in rich and poor, that you should treat people differently until I got older. Because my dad would take us places in the smallest hole in the walls, and I think that was the same for everyone on this stage. And we would be with people, and the love and the energy that you felt from the most humble people in the most humble situations, that was the fuel and that was the energy that they lived off. They only had a meal to give you. In many of these small towns in rural Alabama, rural Georgia, they would stop and get a meal, and they keep on riding doing their work. And we would do these little routes around the towns and see people, and they would just welcome us and give us a big hug. And as kids, you want to hug all these people, but the love was there. And it was a love. That love is so much stronger and it's so powerful. And I get chills right now just thinking about how they had so much strength to love people in spite of the violence that they committed, the atrocities and the hate that was being espoused in the media and physically towards them. So, it takes a lot of courage to love people in spite of the violence that they throw at you.
You're a very young man, and at that time, when did you realize that your father was a part of what we describe as bending that arc of the moral universe towards a more just society? When did you know that he was something more than just daddy, or did you ever recognize that he was more than just daddy before he passed?
I don't think I really began to understand that until I was probably 17, 18, because, I had teachers who taught me about the civil rights movement, and I was like, wait a minute, my dad has pictures of that. And oh, wait a minute, those are his friends. He's talking about Julian Bond, and he's talking about RDA, and he's talking about Jose. And so when I got to be 17, I ended up running for president of Mays High School. And I had a responsibility to create a youth group to stop the violence between Mays, Douglas, and the other schools in the cluster. We didn't plan it that way. We actually were kind of hanging out good, bad, and ugly, and it might have been a gang. But when we got together, we were like, well, why are we all fighting each other? We played Little League football together. We all know each other. We got girlfriends, family members that know each other. We go to the same church. So why would Mays fight Doug? And why would Darryl fight? And my dad was like, son, finally y'all got it. The new mission is about protecting our community from the inside out. And that's when it dawned on me, like, dang, he's been teaching us all this stuff for all these years, and this is how I pick up the baton and go forward.
Yeah. Michael Julian Bond. Julian Bond. If you were describing him, we've known him, we've seen this young, handsome guy, suave guy, who had the ability of articulation like none you've seen. Tell us in your own words, who is Julian Bond to you?
Well, who Julian Bond to me as a public figure is someone who was a powerful intellectual. He was very well read. He was almost a stoic in his personality traits, and he was fearless, for his size and his frame. He believed in education. He believed in mobilization. He believed in advancing the rights of all people, and he believed in the tenets of the civil rights movement. He believed in nonviolence. As a person and a father, he is all of that, but he's also very different. He was very, very silly. He was very, very funny. He liked to play games. He liked to intellectually engage you recreationally. He loved to poke and prod your mind, and even as children, I'm in the middle of 5. He was a provocateur at the table between us in our discussions, and even questioning our assumptions with each other and the way we played, the things we did. And he could be a very good playmate with you. Mm-hmm. But he was wasn't much of a disciplinarian. I have to tell you that. He was terrible at discipline. But as much as a parent can be a friend to a child, that's who he was.
Tell us his insertion point into the movement. Where does he start? Because Julian had several iterations. He's with King, SNCC, I believe at one time, SCLC, but he ends up making his biggest mark probably in the NAACP as his chairman. Tell us his role. How did he come to make the movement his life?
Well, of course, it kind of started at home at first with my grandparents.
First of all, you come from a heavyweight family of intellectuals. In your family pedigree, college presidents, deans, and a bunch of folks I've seen. Is it your grandfather, uncle with Einstein at a lecture?
That was my grandfather, Horace Mann Bond.
Yeah.
He was first African American president of Fort Valley and first African American president of Lincoln University. But his father, who was born a slave, Reverend James Bond, the original James Bond, was a Congregationalist minister who went to school at Berea, walked 75 miles, and paid his tuition with a steer. And at Berea, of course, in Kentucky, they were welcome. They taught everyone. They taught women. They taught African Americans, and so they basically educated him from what would have been kindergarten level all the way up through college. And so my dad's formation comes out of that background. But it's funny, he ended his public career in much the way he began it. He started out in the NAACP Youth Council and was a youth council officer when he was 14, 15 years old, just like we were activists at 14, 15 years old. And that's where he actually met Reverend Amos Brown out of the Bay Area in one of the youth council conferences, and they were learning about the sit-in movement that was going on in America prior to those in Greensboro sitting in. There had been sit-ins in Oklahoma, there had been sit-ins in Ohio, and much today, like with social media, if you don't post it, it didn't happen. So it wasn't reported, so nobody knew about it and the word didn't spread. So when he got to Morehouse, of course, Morehouse and AU Center was a crucible for, intellectual engagement, across the campuses or what have you. He got involved in the student movement after the Greensboro sit-ins because he was challenged by Lonnie King, and they were in the Yates and Milton. They're on the corner at Fair and Chestnut now, Student Movement Boulevard in Brawley, talking about the movement and wondering if it was going to happen here in Atlanta.
Right.
So started out in the student movement here, and that almost simultaneously, the formation of SNCC was being done, really out of outgrowth of SCLC, because they wanted a student kind of wing.
Yeah.
But quickly, SNCC flipped on them and had their own minds, so we became involved in SNCC. And one of the things he shared with me when he did descend to be the chairman of NAACP, and he said this quite often, when he was a student activist, he poo-pooed the NAACP once he got into SNCC, because he said it was for old people.
Right.
And I was like, what do you think about it now that you're old? You're an older guy. The most important organization in the world.
Right.
Greatest one in the world. So, yeah.
He has a history. He goes into elected politics, and his case become a seminal case all the way to the Supreme Court. He was elected in the 60s as one of the first, if not the first, black, after Senator Leroy Johnson, to the Georgia legislature. His opposition followed King's opposition to the Vietnam War, and the Georgia legislature, which was all white, refused to seat him. He had won the popular vote. He had won the election. They did not give him a seat, and he had to fight to get a seat in the Georgia legislature. What did he say about that? Of what historic flashpoint was that for him? To win election, to not be denied a seat because of his views, but to ultimately end up serving in that body as a state senator. What was that like for him? What did he say about it?
Well, when he was asked about the stance on Vietnam, he hadn't been sworn in yet. It was December of '65. And he was actually affirming the stance that SNCC had held, that John Lewis, who we all know very well and miss, as chairman of SNCC, had made. And it was really kind of a secondary, third level question as whatever press conference they were at was breaking up. It wasn't even about the Vietnam War. But he was very shocked and surprised by it, and how vehemently the leader of the Georgia House, Sloppy Floyd, took him on. And so he was ousted, I think it was like 196 to 12. 5 of them were Republicans. One was Rodney Cook and Michael Egan, who was a longtime Republican in the House. 5 Republicans. I guess there were only 5 Republicans in the House. And so not only did he win that election, they cleared the seat, and much like our young brothers out of Tennessee that got put out and they ran again. I mean, he ran again because they posted a vacancy. He won that election. They didn't seat him. He ran again when they reposted the election. Won that. They refused to seat him. 3 times he won that race. And ultimately went to the Supreme Court, and he got a unanimous decision. And so he was a little jaded by that because, even as an activist growing up in the Jim Crow South, still was an idealist about the potential of America.
Right.
And so, you still want to believe that what is written down in the Constitution and on our law books is actually good somewhere in America, that somebody will honor it. And so coming out of that experience, he wanted to make that real. He wanted to make that promise real.
Kwame Abernathy, your father is a preacher. He's down in the Montgomery area. He sees the emergence of a new possibility in America for black people. He is working on the ground, and he hears of this young preacher in Atlanta named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He calls King to Montgomery, where he has been a well-established preacher, to head up the Montgomery Improvement Association. Talk about Ralph David Abernathy your father in his involvement in the civil rights movement, starting back from Montgomery days and him making the call to get King to come, a 26-year-old King to come down to be a part of what was about to be probably one of the most profound moves. The bus boycott, Rosa Parks in down, all of that is getting ready to jump off when your father said, hey, there's opportunity for leadership here. Tell us about that.
So I don't want to set the record straight. I'm such a student of history, and it's wonderful to learn the backstory on both of these men's fathers. I grew up, of course, as we grew up here in Atlanta. You know them, and I knew both of these men growing up, and I knew their fathers growing up, and had so much great respect for them, because that's what I was taught to do in my household. But as Kwanza was saying, you know, it wasn't until I made it until college, my freshman year, when I took that African American Histories class, and you know, up until 1865, and then post-emancipation proclamation, a 2-half class, that I really got a grasp on our parents' contribution on the timeline. And I say that because it didn't, the timeline, of course, didn't begin and end with Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph David Abernathy, Leon Hall and Julian Bond, and it certainly did not end with Barack Obama either. And it will continue to go. And we are at present day watching this new movement take place. But to answer your question, in 1954, my mother and father were just young pastor and a first lady in a small town in Montgomery, Alabama, and the sister church, which was Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, and my father pastored at First Baptist. The sister church had just removed their previous pastor, who was Reverend Dr. Vernon Johns. And Dr. Johns, Reverend Bond Johns, was my father's mentor. And he was a great scholar, and both of my parents had so much respect for him. So once he's removed his pastor, they bring in a new minister, a young PhD, one in which the congregation, I'm sure, thought that they could control, because Dr. Johns could not be controlled at all.
Yeah, Dr. Johns, that old school preacher, said if you see a good fight, you ought to get in
Jump
it.
in
And
it.
they asked him to preach a guy's funeral from the community that hadn't done much. He said, "Now I don't want to preach the funeral now." They said, "Oh no, you the preacher here. You're gonna preach the funeral." He said, "Okay, I'll preach the funeral." He said, "Look here, there lies Tom. Tom lived like a dog. He died like a dog. Now Undertaker come claim the body." So he was the stuff of legend. And I'm sure for that kind of dude, he wasn't going, you know, they were like, oh, yeah, it's time to get him out of town.
So he, as you can imagine, he drove the congregation crazy. And they thought that they were getting a young man, 26, who was focused on finishing his PhD and the paperwork so he could get his degree, and then create a program for a contentious congregation. And during that first year, Uncle Martin, Aunt Coretta, and Yolanda, and my mother, Juanita, my father, and then my oldest sister, Wandalyn, the 6 of them did nothing but just hang out. That's all that they could do in a segregated society. There weren't any, as my mother would tell me, there weren't any restaurants we could go to. I mean, we had to entertain at each other's houses.
Yeah.
So during that year prior to the boycott, they, you know, hung out and connected and bonded, and the 2 men bonded and became best friends. Well, lo and behold, the Women's Political Council in Montgomery, that was really the bedrock and had been laying all of they had the network and laid the foundation for the boycott. They had a couple of professors at Alabama State were my father's friends, as he also taught at Alabama State and graduated from Alabama State. And the women had led protests, and prior to Rosa Parks' arrest, because she was the third woman to refuse to give up her seat. Prior to those arrests, they had worked on trying to create a plan with the bus company so that they would do better in taking care of their not the parishioners, but their patrons in the ridership, which was the majority of which were black women. So the political council, back and forth, doing the best that they could. Well, you know, as much of history is, you know, we had, you know, the perfect storm, so to speak.
Yeah.
And when Ms. Parks refused to give up her seat, as that third person, the two previous people were teenagers, young people, which, you know, I can't stress that enough because, of course, our movements, and we're on the other end now, but our movements have been led by younger people.
Yeah.
And our fathers were involved. My father got involved at 29. Uncle Martin was 26 when Ms. Parks refused to give up her seat. The president of NAACP, E.D. Nixon, an older man in his 60s, and Rosa Parks is the secretary. And he calls the house. My mother answers the phone. Juanita, is Ralph there? He gives my father the charge and the instructions, which were, over the weekend, E.D. Nixon worked on the railroad. So he's gone for Friday, Saturday, and he's coming back on Sunday. He said, while I'm gone, since you have just led the membership drive, going door to door for NAACP and collecting our membership dues and getting increasing our membership, I want you to do the same thing and let everybody know that we're not going to ride the bus on Monday and protest a Rosa Parks arrest. So Daddy and Uncle Martin, and then he says to him, he said, I know that this is a lot to ask you to do over such a short time period. Get the new guy over at Dexter, the new young guy at Dexter, get him to help you. And, you know, in the community, Daddy and Uncle Martin were the two youngest ministers in town now, 26 and 29. They go door to door. Uncle Martin was a great pool player. They went to the pool halls. They went any and everywhere. The Women's Political Council, including my mother, typed leaflets to let everyone know that they were not to ride the bus on Monday. Well, one of the housekeepers, domestics at the time, received this leaflet, and she told her boss that she couldn't come to work on Monday because she couldn't get there. And the lady said, well, I didn't tell you not to come. And she said, well, I have this piece of paper, so I can't ride the bus. And she said, well, I need to see it. So she came over there and got the piece of paper. And she was so incensed that she gave the leaflet to the editor at the Montgomery Advertiser. So on Sunday morning, the Advertiser reads, Negroes will not ride the bus and protest the Rosa Parks arrest. So if you didn't get it in the street, you got it in by your pastor on Sunday, on the front cover of the newspaper on Sunday morning. Well, E.D. Nixon returns, and he's like, well, you see what we've done. Well, Monday, the buses rode empty. Tuesday, the buses were empty. And Wednesday, the buses were empty. Well, on Wednesday, they organized and created the Montgomery Improvement Association. I tell all of this in this sequence because those men did not, my father and Uncle Martin did not make the Montgomery bus boycott.
Certainly.
The boycott made them. The people of the community led that boycott. The people of the community organized for 381 days without an organization for 3 days.
Without internet. Snapchat
Oh my goodness.
or anything.
Right.
I still marvel at the ability to organize. As one who loved organizing, how they did it, right, and how it was so effective. All right.
The rest, literally, is history. It's history.
Kwanza Hall, going back to you, and Kwame just said something that a lot of times we couldn't go to the restaurants, right? We couldn't go out, and so we had to entertain at our house. Who are some of the most interesting people that ended up at the table in the Hall household?
Great question. And let me just come to one on the organizing. So fast forward to the 1960s, 63, and they had to figure out a way to get people together for the Selma to Montgomery March. My dad was one of the people with Dorothy Tillman who went and locked the doors on the schools. Students don't have anywhere to go, and you got a great fight to get into, they're going to go to the fight. And that was when he needed to get run out of town. That was what really caused it, that moment. So organizing tactics sometimes requires stepping over the line to make good happen.
Do I know that?
You know what I'm talking about. You've done a lot of that, and so all four of us have done that. My fondest memory of you is, being arrested for some good.
Yeah.
And B.J. Johnson and Lewis Johnson, who's a councilman in Grenada, Mississippi now, said, first time I went to jail was when your daddy came and stayed at our house.
Yeah.
And he said, I was like 9 years old, but I was following him because he was talking about something that mattered. And that's a story across all of our lives and all of our friends. But at our house, Coretta Scott King would be there. You would see entertainers, people from the music industry. And I was just thinking about, people I've kind of interacted with.
Right.
Andrew Young would come by sometimes. They would have loud music playing. So it was kind of a way to congregate. We had the first Kwanzaa celebration at our house, but it had more white people than black people because the civil rights movement wasn't about just black people with courage. It was about a diverse set of people with courage. Native Americans, white, liberals, and white people might have been conservative. Their parents might have been conservative, but they wanted to be a part of the cause. So, you see, just a diverse set of people. I never knew who all these weird people were as a child. But growing up, as I got older, I met many of them. I've received emails over the years and just out of the blue. Yeah. I live in France now. My father was a congressman, and we lived in Oregon. And your dad was the person who inspired me in Mississippi in the 60s because we were a part of the Freedom Rides. So those kind of stories I know you each have had as well. But it was the titans of the civil rights movement came by our house, but also everyday Joe people, regular folks who were just courageous and willing to give their time, talent, and treasure to make a difference in our society.
Michael, Julian, I know you'd say, when did you know that your dad was cool dad? I know you've said to me on occasion that you knew your dad was cool because he made it to what late night show?
Oh, Saturday Night Live.
When he hosted Saturday Night Live, you thought that was the coolest thing. Talk about that, your dad hosting Saturday Night Live.
Well, yeah, it was really great because it was the week of my birthday in April. And he had met Lorne Michaels, the producer of the show, some months earlier, at some type of political event. And so he invited him to be on the show. And so all that week, I was begging my dad, hey, this is the week of my birthday, take me to New York, take me to New York. And, my father had an unflappable, stoic manner, and he responded much like Mr. Spock, and I'm all enthusiastic. He just said, no, you're not going, I'm not taking you. But be that as it may, so many people from Atlanta went up, during that week, when he made that appearance, and it was a pretty funny show. There are a couple of scenes that kind of go flat, but by and large, it was very funny, and he enjoyed it very much, and we enjoyed watching him because, one of the ways that I would ingratiate myself into my dad want to stay up late was to try to talk to him and engage, and we loved being up late with him, watching TV, Johnny Carson, what have you. But Saturday Night Live, he let us stay up for that. He enjoyed the comedy, and so it was a great experience. I remember his opening dialogue, and he went through all this litany about how he had worked in civil rights and had recounted all of this kind of thing, and said he wondered why he had gotten the invitation. And he says, I finally figured it out. He said, they want me to be their chocolate Easter bunny. And they got a lot of big laughs.
Right.
It was really funny, so we really enjoyed it.
Kwame, tell us about, it's interesting because other than Leon Hall, who I did meet, I spent a lot of time with your dad and with Julian Bond because of my connection with Arthur Langford. Your dad served with Arthur, and Arthur was assistant pastor over at West Hunter. So I sit there a lot with him because Arthur was never on time for anything. So I would sit there and wait on your dad. I remember the very last conversation I had with him was not too long before he passed, made his transition. Tell us about the Ralph Abernathy. We've heard him, the preacher, the pulpiteer, the praying, praying warrior. Tell us something we didn't know. What made your dad dad to you? Tell us about your dad, the guy who, when he could take off all of the, the movement stuff. Who was Ralph Abernathy just at home or with his kids and his wife?
Oh, wow. So I don't think my father was a nurturer, and it's not a surprise that the ministry was led into the ministry at all, because he was an outstanding pastor as well. And he, as a father, he was the type of man that, dad, the type of male influence, I guess, that I could best describe it, that you never really wanted to disappoint. He didn't do a lot of fussing, didn't argue. He was a grinder, and he did it by example. An early riser every morning, and the trick that he'd use for us was, and for me, was he was in the military, so he knew how to make up a bed better than my mother or any housekeeper we had ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we get out of the bed, boy, when your feet hit the floor, make up the bed. So of course, when your bed is made up, you can't get back in it.
Mm-hmm.
And first thing he'd say is, nothing comes to a sleeper in the bed but a dream. Let's get up and live. And life is to be lived. And on Sunday morning, this is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Wake up, wake up, wake up. So we, every day, the example that I saw with him was getting things done, working on solutions, being with a positive mindset. As a pastor, you can imagine, and a civic leader, you can imagine, the problems and the questions and everything that comes to you during the course of the day, from that 7:30 telephone call with somebody calling until late at night. And he always kept a positive mindset, and was always present with people, and gave his time, so that the time that he was with people, people always thought that they were so super special with him.
Now I can tell you that's true, right? The last conversation I had with your father, he was telling me that the pipe organ in West Hunter wasn't working, right? I think I may have been 20, 25, Kwanza, right? And he says, now, I'm going to need, because he's this slow, methodical that pulled you in, I'm going to need some help with this. And of course, he put the squeeze. Now, can you make a little donation to get the pipe organ?
The largest pipe organ?
The largest, most ostentatious, beautiful place. And I was like, yeah, Dr. Abernathy, I'll make a donation. Soon as the author give me, pay me, I'm going to make a donation. But he was just that guy. Kwanza, when you look at your father's life, your father didn't live long. He was 44, I believe. 42?
42, yeah.
When he passed. 1989, I believe it was?
Correct.
He made an impact that's felt, because I'm telling you, I get the opportunity to talk to a lot of these civil rights ground crew that's left. And inevitably, they all talk about your dad. What was his magic? What was his ethics? And what did he leave with you as advice that you live by today?
Boy, that's a tough question. And I really have to go back to something Kwame said, and it made me think about the pool halls. So these were real men.
Yeah.
A man's man is what they were. And, they could hang with the toughest gangsters, that they might have been gangsters if they would not have done the intellectual things that they did and the commitments to community and to faith. And, oftentimes we would find ourselves in the pool hall over at Shepherd's or somewhere like that, an old restaurant on Auburn Avenue or something. And you're just like, why are we in this place? What's going on? And, they were talking about real business, about things that need to be done in our city. And fast forward, I look back and I just think that my father gave me an unwavering fortitude to get back up, regardless of how many times you get knocked down. If you don't kill me, I'm going to get back up. And he was that kind of man. He would never stop for something he believed in, an ideal, and especially, the King family. And there was no Dr. King without Ralph David Abernathy. When you look at the pictures, who's standing next to him?
Always.
Throughout. You know how much courage that takes? How much trust he had in that man?
Yeah. So,
these are people, the stories really haven't been fully told, unfortunately, and I think there's a responsibility that all three of us have. I have pictures of my dad with Julian Bond, and they're with a man named Al Dixon. Al Dixon was like the godfather of Montgomery. He owned radio stations, car dealerships, he ran numbers, but he also supported the movement. Yeah. And speaking of support for the movement, all the music industry had to pony up. They wrote checks. Coretta would send my dad to go get money from Aretha Franklin, from Frank Sinatra, from Sammy Davis Jr., and they do concerts to support the King Center. But my dad would have a satchel of money. I had to go pick this up because we got to make sure this happens for the holiday. Wow. So the good, the bad, and even sometimes the ugly all came together for a higher purpose. And my dad taught me that you could see good in everybody, and you could never look down, no big eyes, no little U's, because you never know who could help you make a difference for the purpose that you have on this earth. Yeah.
Michael Julian, a lot of people, a lot of children of the movement, when they're honest and transparent, say, you know what, the biggest thing that impacted me was my father was just never at home. Kwame, I can imagine movement work was tough. I mean, you could be in Cicero, Chicago, and then in, Bed-Stuy, and then you down in St. Augustine, Florida. Talk about the missing father. Was that ever an issue for you or for your brothers and sisters, or did y'all always understand that this is Dad's work, this is what he has committed his life to, and it may mean we don't get to see him as much as we would like?
Yes, it was an issue, really more for my siblings than for myself. I'm here as a result of his first election night. 9 months later, here I am. And so I had the opportunity to have it explained to me why my dad traveled. why he was on, in different places and why he was going. My older brother and sister, even though he was involved in SNCC prior to his election, he was still basically based kind of at home or in and around the house. My younger brother and sister, Jeffrey Cookie, he was always traveling. He had to travel. And so to make money, as SNCC kind of, I don't want to say folded, but faded, he had to find other means of employment. And the state legislature at the time, I think it paid like $5,000 a year.
Yeah. Ain't too much more than that now.
No, not much more than that. So, because of the phenomenon that happened to him around his case, he became in demand as a speaker.
Right.
And so he was gone at least 4 days out of every week, sometimes 6.
Yeah.
So he was rarely at home, particularly during what we would consider the school calendar year, because he was in demand as a speaker. And so he was gone. And so that made the moments that he was here in town all the more precious. But I think that I was more accepting of his need to be away, because when I was very small, I remember my mother, both of my grandmothers, kind of explaining that to me more and more, but it was painful for my other siblings.
Yeah. Kwame, God, I can only imagine your dad's travel schedule. Talk about the times when he took you with him, or took your brothers and sisters. Did he ever take you all? Other than when he was doing ministry, when y'all in Montgomery or living here, did you ever go on the road with him? And did you ever get a sense of how dangerous the work was he was actually doing? Probably prior to King's assassination. Clearly, after that, we all understand, these people are serious. They will kill you. Did you ever get a sense of how dangerous it was, and did you ever go with him on the road, your brothers and sisters?
So, the night that SCLC was founded, my mother was asleep in the house, and they bombed the house, and she lived through that. She and both of my sisters, I should say. She was pregnant with one sister, and then the other sister was an infant in the crib. So we, my sister.
Stop right there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you recall your father saying about that? Because, and I'm going to ask about moms in a minute. That's enough to make you turn your chips in, right? That's enough to say this is too much. What did your father tell you and your mother tell you? Because your mother was an extraordinary leader in her own right. What did he say about that? The house had been bombed with my baby, my 2 babies, and my wife in here.
So
what was the tenor of that moment?
Here I have to give the credit to my mother, because she let him off the hook. Being a man and having been in relationships, I understand about the pressure that your partner and your partner's wishes can put on you. But my mother took him off the hook, and she said, in fact, they had been warning that they were going to bomb the house earlier that day. And so, the phone would ring incessantly off the hook. People would call and curse her out, and she'd hang it up. The phone would ring, and she'd pick it up and hang it up, And they let off a blast in her ear. And she started crying. My father looked at her, and he said, well, what's going on? And she said, no, I don't want to tell you. And he said, well, if you're afraid of something, just come and go with us to Atlanta. And she was pregnant, I think about maybe 6 months pregnant at the time, with an infant. And she didn't want to travel with all of that at that moment. So she said, no, I'll just stay here. And she said, she told my father that if something happens, somebody will have to, they need to do something too. They don't need to kill both of us, they need to kill one. Somebody needs to be here for the kids. So Juanita Jones Abernathy was a soldier from day one. And as she would remind my father constantly, he didn't make her. And she had stood up, and she's also from Hale County, from Uniontown, Alabama. So she had seen her share of racism and everything, as you can imagine, that anybody in rural Alabama would see during that time, in the 40s and 50s. But she let him off the hook, and she continued to, because she was just as committed to the movement as he was. And he, of course, she kept a home and a family together while he was on the road, and that allowed for him to do the work that he did and not to come home. Of course, he was stressed, as any father is once they enter the door, but it was my mother, without a doubt, allowed and made it happen. The two of them, as a pair, as we all know, with any team, as the proverb says, you go if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it was a band of brothers, a band of sisters. It was a team of people. Martin Luther King Jr. did not do anything by himself. And as Kwanza was saying, there are scores of people whose names we'll never know. In all of these large towns and small towns that did work and laid their lives on the line before King and Abernathy and SNCC, CORE, anybody came to town. The student movement, as Michael was talking about, the student movement, and people can't even imagine how radical they were.
They created it so that they could be radical. They were not. They was like, hey, y'all moving too slow. Dr. King, you moving too slow. Exactly. It was wonderful speeches to have, but we finna go sit at this counter. We didn't talk about Atlanta's history as, you had the Daddy King, A.D. Walden, William Home Borders. You had the big 5 or 6 who said, look, we're going to do it the Atlanta way. We negotiate with the white power structure, and they made a pledge. Dr. King Dad made a pledge. There will be no major protests in Atlanta. Dr. King won't lead any, right? And you don't have a recollection of big, but the students said we didn't sign that pact. We are going to sit in at H.L. Green, Woolworth, and the Julian Bonds and all the others, all of the students from the Atlanta University Center, Lonnie King and others said, we going down there and we're going to force progress a little bit faster here. Jen, we're going to get ready to wrap it up, but we talked about home. Mothers play such a valuable role because they had to keep it all together. Evelyn had to keep it together, and I had the good fortune to work with your mother at City Hall for many years. Talk about the role of your mother in all of this.
Yes. So my mother's name was Evelyn Hall, but everyone knew her as Cookie.
Yeah.
Right? So she was the Cookie of the late 60s and 70s here. And, my parents met in Chicago because my dad was sent there by Dr. King to help Jesse Jackson with the gangs. Reverend Jackson got in a little sideways with L. Rookins, and my dad was sent up to kind of help bring everybody back together. And so they met organizing and kind of protesting with Billy Eckstein and people like that. And fast forward, they ended up, forming a union. But my dad was always in my life, with the exception of when I was born. He was on a mission or trip somewhere, and J.T. Johnson and Tom Houck took my mom to the hospital. So they were there when I was born. Right. So, but other than that, my dad would generally take us around the city and have us doing things with him. And my mom just made sure that we were supported and stayed, on the mission with our dad. And he would always try to make sure we were on. They got divorced later, but go on fishing trips every weekend.
Right.
Spend time with your dad.
Yeah.
My dad was offered to run for mayor in Grenada. They were going to support him. They had jobs all over the country. He refused to leave Atlanta because he wanted to be in our life.
Yeah.
Because he never knew his father.
That's special.
So, mothers and fathers matter in your life. Your mother's always going to be there for you regardless.
Yes.
And I'm just so thankful to have both of them, throughout my life.
Mike, your mom, she had to keep it all together. And that's what, 5 of you all?
Yeah, there's 5 of us. And so, I mentioned earlier that my father was not a disciplinarian. If you look up disciplinarian, you're going to find my mother's picture.
Now, let's say you passed the age of limitation. Now, what disciplinarian back in that day mean that she picked up a switch cord or whatever? That was she, or did you get time out? I don't know if you got time out.
Well, no, the best way to describe, remember that commercial, the white tornado? Okay. Back in the day, the cleaning product.
Right.
Clean up that. Now, imagine a leather belt tornado. My mother did not play. I mean, just not at all. And, she ran the house. She made sure that we had everything that we needed. She was there, obviously in support of us. When my father was traveling, like I said, he was gone 4 to 6 days. That's just average on a week. Sometimes might be 2 or 3 weeks, on a travel schedule. Yeah. And my mother was there for us. I mean, and then of course, not just in the parenting, but obviously in the support. I pride myself on being an artist. My mother's who taught me how to draw.
Really?
Yeah, my mother taught me how to draw. I mean, I used to find the white pages of books or any white surface I would draw on, and after she got tired of spanking me about that, she sat me down and said, "Hey, this is how you do it," and it set me on a course of creativity that I'm still on, and so. She made it happen, and she looked good doing it. She was one of the sharpest women in Atlanta in her day. So we were very, 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 very proud of her. She's still out, even to this day. He's still blessed to have her. She leaves the house and goes somewhere every single day. Yeah, doesn't matter if it's 0 degrees or it's a tornado outside. So I got to get out of here. I got to do something. And so she's passed that spirit on to us.
I have to see her paintings. Many people that know I used to watch Mike on city council. We served together. And I could tell the level of the boredom of whatever the agenda was by the volume of the sketches that he made, right? So Michael Jr. is a collector of Marvel comic stuff, but he sketches like nobody's business. Kwame, I knew your mom very well. I remember a little bit after your brother died, it was Christmas. We came and sung Christmas carols with Mike Langford on the step. A force of nature. She was just a force of nature, and the goodness. That day it broke me, because just spontaneously your sister came out. You got us. Which one did sister sing opera? Wanda,
the oldest.
Oh my God, I think she was there visiting, because Ralph, your brother, had died, who was just a great friend. But she came out, and we thought we were going to pray to her. She preached to us. When the dry in the house. You've been talking about her all throughout this conversation. What made her just a super mom to you?
Oh, wow. I'd have to say her level of commitment. And she started on the journey early, as I said. Her father was Tuskegee University had awarded him a Black Belt Farmer of the Year, and he drove a Ford Model T. And as she would say, we didn't burn wood at our house, we burned coal. So she grew up very well to do, and the people in town respected her father. When the movie Django came on we would, my mother and I, we would squeal. She would squeal, actually, and I'd squeal listening to her laugh. The character, when Jamie Foxx's character is riding a horse, I'd say to her, I said, this is just like when Granddaddy would drive his car downtown in downtown Uniontown, and she said it's exactly like that. And people would look at him, black people, of course, would look at him with respect, and white people with contempt. But that was the family that she was raised in. So prior to, in fact, she had been secretary of the local NAACP, was her first teaching job in Beatrice, Alabama, before she met my father. And, you know, she prided herself in doing that. And that, of course, led her to make sure that my siblings were involved in the civil rights marches, because they would ask, much like everyone else, you know, where's Daddy? Where's Daddy? So her answer to that question is, well, Daddy's out here, and she sent them out, and they were actually, you know, these little kids that you'll see in some of these pictures, they were the little children, my brother and my two sisters, that were at the head of the marches, so that they could see and understand what was going on and why he wasn't there. But her level of commitment from then through the movement and then the years afterwards, after, as I say, post-assassination all the way through, and the time that you spent with her, you know, in her 70s, late 70s and 80s, and the example that she set for us to stay, consistently stay civically involved, and committed to the cause, and never to forget that this fight will always continue, because history will repeat itself, as we see.
Gentlemen, we're getting ready to wrap up in just a second. Kwanza Hall, what do you miss most? 1989 comes around, and 42 years old. I understand what that means. My father was 44 when he passed. What do you miss most about Leon Hall, your father?
So I was a freshman in college at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and I went to do genetics, right? And the political science department always called me. They said, hey, you're a leader. Why don't you do political science? I said, who does political science at MIT? And I called my dad back, and he would say, I said, Dad, look, they're calling me. They want me to do political science. I say, son, whatever you do, don't go into politics, right? 2 weeks later, he passed away. And I missed the fact that I used to be able to call him and get an answer on any topic I wanted to talk about. And it was like he was a sage, like Julian Bond or like Ralph David Abernathy. You could call these men, you could talk to them, and they knew everything. They knew about countries all over the world. They had friends in these countries. So that would be the thing I really, my brother for sure as well, would have missed that.
Michael, Julian Bond goes on and stays within what the family pedigree was. He becomes an extraordinary, exceptional professor, college professor, had a distinguished career at American University and other colleges, made it to an older age, older than Ralph Abernathy and certainly Leon Hall, but you got to miss him. What do you miss most about Julian Bond?
Well, probably much the same with what Kwanza was saying, the ability to speak with him, to see him, to engage with him. You know, we're spoiled. You know, most people can't go on to YouTube or Google videos of their deceased relatives and see and hear their voice. But it's the personal intimacy that is missed. Yeah. You know, the personal frivolous moments sometimes that you miss in the engagement. I mean, one experience I had with my dad that I treasure was the night Obama got elected. And, you know, he also told me not to go into politics, you know, when I was going into politics. I want to point that out. But the night Obama got elected, you know, he called me. I was I was literally trapped at Morehouse. I was trying. I think it was at the Hyatt where they had the big party. So I was trying to get to the party, but my daughter was at Spelman, and they were doing something on the campus, and we got over there, and of course all the kids are in the street, so you couldn't leave. And so when I answered the phone, he didn't say anything, but I could feel him smiling through the phone.
Yeah.
And I asked him. I said, "Hey," I said, "how does it feel to finally be free?"
All this work was not in vain.
It wasn't in vain, you know. And it's moments, that kind of understanding, you know, they get it. They're your dad. And I think that's what I miss the most.
Kwame, it seems like we knew Ralph Abernathy for a lifetime, but the fact of the matter is he died at 64, I believe. It seemed like he'd been here forever. 64 is young. I'm 58.
That's right.
Michael Julian Bond older than me by a couple months.
That's right.
But it seemed like he was here for eternity, but he wasn't. What do you miss about your father?
Wow. You know, I hate to repeat the same thing, but I miss that counsel. I miss his cologne. I'm sorry. I miss his counsel. I miss his cologne. I miss him asking me which one of the two ties should he pick or should he wear. I miss hearing, as you said, you know, his cadence. My father, golly, you know.
Tell us how he talks. Show us how he talk. How did he talk? How did he talk, Kwame?
You know, Daddy had, it's, you know, I think about it, you know, Derrick, to your point, he had survived 2 strokes.
People didn't know that.
Had survived 2 strokes and was just left with a slower speech. So, you know, people from time to time think that people that talk slow may not be too quick.
But he was a scholar, though. He was always just sharp.
No doubt. Daddy's his master's dissertation at Atlanta University was on the Montgomery bus boycott.
Subject matter expert.
Yeah, so I miss that counsel, and
there you go.
You never adjust. I guess, you know, we make do.
Yeah. It's never the same.
It's never the same.
Gentlemen, to wrap it up, I ask all of you all to bring something with you as our little show and tell that reminds you of your dad. If you want to pull it out, then you need to retrieve it. Come help me over here. Then there you go.
Well, I'm wearing mine.
Okay, we're gonna let you tell us about it. That's Michael Jr. Pass it along. All right. We'll start at the end. Kwame. Kwanza. Leon Hall. When you think about the essence of this man and trying to put your hands on something, you know, for a long time I would, you know, my father died when I was 18, but I held on to one jacket, something that I could just touch and feel, right? Until I done remodeled the house and got rid of whatever it was, right? But then I had my mind's picture. What'd you bring today to give the essence of who Leon Hall, your father, was?
And thanks for asking the question, first of all. You know, I went through the thought of clothes and countless speeches that he wrote for people and pictures. But the thing that really was closest to me was his phone books. He had everybody's number in these books. And this one, it's, of course, Julian Bond and Ralph David Abernathy. It's Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, Joe Boone, Andrew Young, Reverend Creasy Sr., Willie Bolden, Cotton Reader, Barbara Howard, Morris Dees, Cecil Franklin, Aretha Franklin's father, Kenny Gamble, Dick Gregory, Senator Ted Kennedy,
Wow.
Congressman Lewis, Langford, Curtis Mayfield, Mukasa, Willie Ricks, Norman Siegel, Al Sampson, Albert Turner, Dorothy Tillman, Mabel Thomas, and of course other books had Andrew Young and Julian Bond and Shirley Franklin, Carl Ware. Just the list goes on and on and on and on. And there was never like a star next to one name like it was more important, because the sign man, JJ of LA and others like that were in there as well.
Yeah.
So, I'm just thankful for the legacy that exists through the relationships.
Wow. Michael Julian, what do you have?
Well, today I brought a cover of Ebony Jr. Now, for those that, I don't want to date myself, but Ebony magazine had a kids magazine, Ebony Jr., and this is my first published work as an artist.
Wow.
And so when I was about 6 years old, as I mentioned, I loved to draw, still drawing. Even though my mother taught me how to draw, I never stopped drawing. And so one day, over at my dad's office over there in West End, he said, why don't you submit this? And he said, if you're a real artist, you got to be published. And so this little picture here, which isn't that great, right? But we sent it off to, Ebony magazine, and some months later, it wound up on one of the covers, and I had 2 or 3, pictures that made it to Ebony Jr. But why this is special to me is that, I had a couple copies of these magazines, and they may be in a box somewhere, but probably about 5 years before my dad passed away, he pulled this out.
Wow.
And this is the frame that he picked. And I was up he was living in D.C., and it wasn't a special occasion. There wasn't anything going on. And he pulled it out and gave it to me. And, as I mentioned, my dad was, his manner was one of stoicism, and, he had this kind of erudite presence. But, he could be so thoughtful and tender, and sentimental, really.
Yeah.
And so this hangs in my office to this day. So I was so amazed that he actually
still had it all those years.
Had it all those years.
And wanted you to have it back.
And he had wanted me to have it back. And he still had another copy of this. But this is the one he gave to me. So I brought this to show, just a demonstration of his
great thing.
caring.
Great. Kwame Abernathy, what do you have with you?
Well, I'm just, boy, y'all bring me to tears. So my father also died when I was 18, and my brother, my older brother, we then had to go through and split the ties and cufflinks and what have you. And I remember my brother had all the cufflinks, and he said, I didn't even know that you were interested in cufflinks. And I said, well, I didn't know they had an age requirement. But I found, among my father's things, I found some pocket squares that were monogrammed with the A on them. And since then, that has been my signature, and I keep them with me at all times. So
I like that.
I wear them as often as possible.
Gentlemen, wrap it up. In 30 seconds, if you were able to just say one last thing to your father, these movement makers and shakers and benders of the moral arc towards a better America, and sacrificers, and those who made America a better place. Kwanza, what would you want to say to him in your 30 seconds if you could have one last conversation with him?
It would be, thank you, how did you do it, and what should I be doing right now?
Michael Julian?
Well, my dad was a huge music fan, and he loved jazz, he loved all kinds of music. And one of his favorite songs was My Buddy by Chet Baker. and I'd want to sing My Buddy with him, because when he would be typing, writing speeches at home, working around at home, he often played that song. So I'd want to sing it with him. Yes. And it'd go, nights are long since you went away. I think about you all through the day. My buddy, your buddy misses you.
Wow. Kwame Abernathy, you get one last conversation before he walks behind the veil of eternity. What would you say to him?
I would want him to know how immensely thankful and grateful I am for his sacrifice. And then, too, I would want to hear him and excited. It was Sunday mornings, you know, my father was so motivated by God and the presence of that new day. And I would want to hear a positive, motivating message for what we have to do and the work we have moving forward. I'd ask for that sermon.
Kwanza Hall, Michael Julian Bond, Kwame Abernathy, on behalf of News and Talk 1380 WAOK, let me thank you all, man, for just coming and sharing these moments, tender moments, songs and pocket squares and phone books and all that you have become. Congratulations on your various successes in your own lives. But thank you for letting our audience and those who will see this become more intimately acquainted with the iconic figures that we've known your fathers to be. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for us. Thank you all for being a part of this conversation.